Right. I think we should start now. So, dear participants, I am pleased to welcome you to our webinar, Out of the Start, From Idea to Innovation, from our Department Innovation and EU Relations. My name is Dominik Hunke. I am Marketing Manager in the Department Sales Coordination, Marketing and Support at DMT. I'm your host today, giving the introduction and taking over to the Q&A part in the end. Our experts today are Dr. Michael Haschke, Director Innovation and EU Relations, and Richard Berse, Innovation Manager, Innovation and EU Relations. This webinar outlines a receipt from idea to innovation. Topics covered in the webinar include the basics of innovation, from the art of starting an innovation to credible marketing and dissemination. Practical advice will be given and some success projects will be presented in this webinar. Before we get started, a few words about the technical procedure. The webinar will be recorded while maintaining your anonymity. We will make it available as a stream to all participants. You are invited to ask questions in the chat. For organizational reasons, we will collect them and I will ask them to the expert on your behalf at the end of the presentation. So now I would say let's get started. And with this, I hand over to Michael Haschke.
A very warm welcome from my side, and thank you for the nice introduction. I'm here with my colleague Richard Berse. My name is Michael Haschke, and we would like to share some experience on from more than 100 projects that DMT has either led or contributed to or are initialized. And having spent more than 100 million euros on innovation, we thought it would be helpful to share some of these most important lessons learned. Let us get started with the idea on what innovation really is. Well, it's definitely the buzzword of the decade in the world of business and education. And the last time I heard it was actually from the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, who said that innovation is required for managing the energy transition. So I think it's safe to say that everybody agrees that it is definitely the key to the future. And I'd like to quote someone who said that innovation itself is science, but successful innovation is actually art. This was a quote from Andrea Castellani, a former stock market expert. So let's look at some art on what innovation really is. There are statements on innovation such that innovation should be disruptive. Innovation is a combination of several things. Some people say you have to ask the right question. Some other people say that for a company, there's no optimal size for innovation. Yet other people say that you have to innovate the core and that you have to apply the 70-20-10 rule, such that you have to focus 70% of your energy, of your resources in improving existing technology, 20% on adjacent markets, and 40% on completely new markets. And of course, all of that embedded in the digital challenges of this time. So this is from the art side. Let's go into a bit more detail. Well, innovation is definitely aims to increase the net present value. The net present value is trying to enhance the value of the company because it wants to generate the products for tomorrow so that you can secure future business. So this is everybody agrees that this is an ongoing process, not a once-off event. And everybody also seems to confirm that innovation is not linear. There is no success without some failure. However, having looked at these more than 100 projects that we have managed, I think there is an opportunity to enhance on the success side. And in this webinar, we are trying to explore what we could do to enhance the success, to improve the success rate of R&D, of research and development projects. And this is why the Forbes magazine came to conclude and said that the more radical and revolutionary innovations tend to emerge from R&D, while more incremental innovations may emerge from practice. Okay, so this is good. We've been definitely doing the right thing then, because we have indulged into a lot of R&D into the last few years. But instead of just reading some statements from other people, let me give you my own example. Some people may or may not know that I'm an enthusiastic sailor, so allow me to give you my own example. This is what sailing used to look like, right? This is a ship from the Viking period with a very simple sails, not very easy to navigate. Definitely not plausible to sail around the world with this kind of ship. But centuries later, look what they came up with. This is a modern ship. Not only did they add a second hull, but, and this is really the important part, they added these little plastic angles at the bottom of these ships, at the bottom of the hull, the so-called hydrofoils. Now, what did these little angles do? They basically lifting the ship out of the water, and so that the boat is actually flying above the water, above the waves, resulting in an increase of speed 3 to 5 times the speed of regular boats. Now, what was an original experiment first has evolved in the last decades towards these ships that most of the racing of these boats they are being used. It's being established as the standard in sailing. And not only is it that these boats come out of they not only fly every once in a while, they fly then more than 85% of the time. This is so convincing that more and more cargo vessels will slowly now adapt this technology to increase the speed so that they can deliver the goods to our doorsteps faster and hopefully also at less cost. So this was my very personal example of what innovation could really look like. What's my message in this picture? My message is that sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to add or change a small little detail, and suddenly everything changes. Let's look at some innovation statistics here. This is the Bloomberg Innovation Index that measures the categories of R&D intensity, manufacturing, the value added, but also the productivity, the high-tech density, and the tertiary efficiency. And this is marked in red, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But also the researcher concentration and patent activity. The message in this slide is that in the Innovation Index 2022, South Korea has displaced Germany. That was a champion in 2020. So why were we displaced by other countries? Is there something that we have done not ideal, perhaps done wrong? Usually what we know is that the German companies are investing around about 3% of the annual turnover into R&D. And R&D is considered, by these companies, R&D is considered the nucleus for progress innovation. The German government goes even raises the 3%, wants to raise the 3% to 3.5% via market-oriented R&D missions, and also some tax deduction policies. And here comes a very provocative statement. A chief economist of a well-known bank says the lack of innovations from universities are a growing problem. I'm not here to say whether this is true or not, but we should keep this in mind, and we should try to explore whether this perhaps is also partly responsible for that Germany is falling behind in the actual innovation index. So let's do a reality check. We are having lots of European R&D funding. We were a part of it ourselves, and yet we have too few innovations. So let's try to think about what could be the reason for that. By doing that, let's look at the key ingredients for innovation and see if we have all these ingredients in place. First, we need a recognized customer need. The recognized customer need also comes with a market, right? If you have a market because you want to sell a product at some point. So you have to do the appropriate market research. If you have a market, you certainly have a business case, and along the line, you develop a business plan, which is being improved as you go along. But you also need the right innovation infrastructure, and that includes, for instance, competent staff, obviously, pilot clients, the first buyers. You need the testing facilities if you want to test your new technologies, but you also need iterative feedback between R&D, the manufacturing, the design and marketing, and also innovation management. And that already tells you that the innovation is definitely teamwork. And this is done by, and this needs to be lived by an innovation culture. It's not innovation is always implemented by a team, not one person alone. And of course, very important, you need financial support. Now, financial support could be in-house financial support, such that you're reinvesting your own profits. But they could also be private investors. They could also be banks and pension funds. They're very eager to invest some of their money into startups and innovative new products. And what DMT has lots of experience is the acquisition of public funding, such as funding by the European Union, but also national funding. And of course, there's always an option of crowdfunding. So this is the financial support, and I want to give you some example of the financial support, how to find financial support. Finding financial support is easy, and I'm giving you a selection of examples of R&D funding opportunities that DMT has successfully tried, and definitely I have tried every one of them. So there is, and this is really just a selection. So the bottom line is, my message is, there is lots of funding opportunities. So basically, and if you're lucky enough to work for the TÜV Group, we have our own internal platform where we can look for funding opportunities. We just log into a certain intranet website, and we fund lots of EU funding and tenders sorted by topic, sorted by by date. But also, when you're visiting as an external, this webinar, please contact DMT Innovation Department for details. We are more than happy to share and also to include you in consortiums that we are constantly developing. So this is the financial support. So we don't seem to lack any financial support. There's lots of money around. At least this is what we learned from the project so far. Let's look at the actual path to innovation. There are different paths depending on what you want to develop. Sometimes you want to develop a new technology. This is probably the classic move forward. Sometimes you want to explore new markets, such that you have a very nice and successful product that, for instance, you have developed for the mining sector, which you now want to apply into the infrastructure. This is certainly an option. And sometimes, and quite often, you want to optimize existing products, such that you want to add digital features, or automation, or maybe artificial intelligence algorithm. All of this is certainly possible. And for this, they have developed the technology readiness level, because often you have ideas, technologies or products that already exist that are at different stages of development. And depending on that stage of development, you have to come up with different measures to bring this innovation or the product or the service forward. You have a TRL system, a technology readiness level system that starts at 1. This is basically the research part. This is what's being done mostly at universities. You have some basic principles involved. You have technology concepts formulated, experimental proof of concept. Once you have that, you move on to the development part, right? This is when you validate the technology in a lab or in a relevant environment. Once you have done that, you're approaching the commercialization level. That includes, once you have a prototype successfully demonstrated in an operational environment, to an actual system that is proven in an operational environment, and that also includes the documentation. That's very important for reaching TRL 9. So when you look at the funding opportunities in Europe, you see that many of these funding opportunities are concentrating on TRL 3 to 5, So basically taking a product from the research level into the development level, or you can start at TRL 5 and reach the next level at TRL 7 when you demonstrate a prototype. Keep in mind that in order to reach TRL 7, you need to successfully demonstrate this prototype in an operational environment. Sometimes it can be challenging to determine at what TRL your product is, but this is also something that DMT can help you with, to find out about the TRL of your product. So technology readiness is very well established. Let's continue with the troubleshooting. We have looked at the funding opportunities. Oh, definitely not a problem. There are lots of funding opportunities. Is there a lack of interest in innovation? I don't think so, because when you look at the applicant structure for these funding opportunities, usually only 11 to 15% of these R&D proposals are being approved. So there seems to be lots of interest in innovation. Are there too few innovators? Very unlikely, because we have so many applicants and so many experts who want to get funding for their innovation. Is there perhaps a lack of the coherent innovation strategy? Well, when you look at the different companies, they all seem to have an innovation strategy one way or the other. And depending on how well these strategies are implemented, the innovation process could be unsorted or out of order, but usually they are fairly well in place. So we can check the boxes for most of these items. But now comes the interesting part. Do we have a market for our products? Have we done our market research? And, very important, have we identified clients for these products? Here comes the most interesting part. I'd like to remind you that innovation is the product. It's an invention, basically. But this invention needs to be commercialized. This is incredibly important. You cannot just develop something and hope that it reaches the market. You have to do the pricing right. The product has to reach a high TRL, at least TRL 7, so that you can even start commercializing. You need to develop the support and training. You need to develop a go-to-market strategy. Sometimes the right timing certainly helps, but the bottom line is you need to be able to scale up your product and generate profit from this. And here comes my message that I really would like to bring across, that my impression is that with many of these R&D projects, and having done more than 100, I think it's safe to say that the main problem right now is that we don't have the commercialization part. And I think this is something that needs to be improved, because innovation without a commercialization is essentially a product without a buyer. But this is not the idea of innovation, because you want to commercialize. You don't want to produce a product where you don't find a buyer. So the buyer is really the key element here. Well, that leads me to the next obvious question: how to find a buyer, or how to generate a product for a buyer. And that brings you to the next question: how to add value for a buyer. The buyer needs to be interested in the project. And when is the right time to actually find a buyer? And this is something that may be one of the problems. You need to find a buyer before you start an R&D project. You need to identify a certain amount, ideally more than one buyer. And then once you have identified the needs of the buyer, this is when you can start developing a project which can be funded by, for instance, public funding. So finding a buyer is key. What else is key? Well, once you have the buyer, he will certainly communicate to you how he wants to achieve his goals. So basically, by being innovative and by being a service provider like DMT is, it's very essential for us to help the buyer to reach his goals, to achieve his goals, and to be successful. If we help our buyer to be successful, that means that we can sell our innovation. This can be done by offering the lowest price, or sometimes by offering the highest technical value, or sometimes by offering a superior service. The bottom line is you need to care about your customer and you need to do your market research. And this falls short in most of the projects that we have accompanied, because it needs to be restructured so that you add market research component before you start applying for public funded projects. And this is why I think it's so important to come up with a kind of recipe on how to starting successful innovation. And this is what, if you want, also makes it a bit of an art to start innovation. Here is the DMT recipe for starting successful innovation. First, tell me who your client is. Tell me 3 to 5 clients who are likely to buy your product, not just one, but 3 or 5. You want to sell your product more than once. Very important. Have they expressed a keen, documented interest in the product? When you look into the big companies, when they develop a new product for a buyer, that product usually comes in document. The interest comes in document, an expression of interest that is being signed. It's legally not committing, but it always helps to narrow and streamline the actual interest of the buyers. And this helps you to focus your development, your product or service development. Try to find out why these clients will buy your product. Why is it explicitly these kinds? Because they will tell you exactly what kind of market sector you're looking into. Second, value proposition. Explain how your product or service will create substantial value for the client. Why will these clients buy your product and not the competitor product? Is it because you're least expensive? Or is it because you're technically superior? Or perhaps it is because you're offering better service? Or perhaps your product is more versatile, such that it can fulfill the full supply chain. And is this possibly your unique selling point, your USP? This is very important to learn. Next step, the solution. Show me your product. Don't just talk about it. I have seen so many presentations and slides where the product is being drawn and visualized. There are fantastic software out there that can visualize the product, but it's very important that you show your product to the client, because this way you can demonstrate whether your product has sufficiently matured. Have you actually reached TRL7? If you have, please show it. Can you demonstrate your product? Incredibly important. The client wants to know before he buys whether he buys something that actually works. Does it fulfill the client's needs? This is very important, because only if it does, this client will buy. And if you find one client who will buy your product, it's very likely that more than one client, that other clients will also buy. The next step is the market. Convince me that there is a high potential for you to grow in this market. You want to sell your product more than once. Have you sold your first product? Have you received and implemented product feedback from your first clients? Once you sell your product for the first time, and the client likes your product, you always get constructive feedback, because he wants to buy a made-over product. He wants to buy the improved product, and because he sees value in this product. And once you have that, have you protected your product IP, your intellectual property? Maybe you have registered a patent. This is incredibly important to keep to rein in the competition. You will not be able to exclude competition, but at least this will give you a head start for a little while and be successful and superior in the market. The next step is the business model. You already have a business model, but you want to fine-tune the business model now. How do you make the first money with your client, and how much money can you make in 1 year? It's very important to note, does your client buy a service or a technology, or maybe he buys a software? Keep in mind that when you're selling a technology, you have to include a warranty that adds to the cost. And also keep in mind that when you're selling software, you have to include a software hotline, because client may want to know details on how to actually use your software. Is your commercialization structure set up? For some products, we learned at DMT, you need to have a slightly different commercialization.
It seems to be we lost Michael again. Sorry about that. Hopefully he will be back soon.
I should be back now.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about this.
We can hear you.
Okay. How many clients can you serve with your team size? Sometimes the amount of products you can sell is limited, and you have to increase your team size. You have to hire more team members. So you need to be aware of all of these items. The next step is competition. You are definitely not the only person doing this. So tell me why you are the best. What exactly makes you better than the competition? And what is your USP? By now, you should be very clear about your USP. Hopefully you have registered your IP. Maybe you have registered a patent, as I mentioned earlier. And how long can you maintain your USP? It's very likely that you will not be able to maintain your USP forever, but let's try to make it as long as possible. The next step is traction. Show me your prototype and the actual pilot revenue of the first sale. Anything that can convince me that you can actually build and sell this. So can you show the first completed sale of the product? And was the first product sold as is, or did you have to make major modifications or minor modifications required to the product? And the most important part, was the sale profitable? Sometimes you have to offer your product at a slightly lower price at the beginning, but once you sell more units, then it becomes more profitable. The vision, very important. Show me what success looks like for you and the steps you're going to take to get there. Define success from your perspective. Is it the amount of new clients acquired, or is it the amount of units sold? Perhaps it's the percentage of growth per year. Tell me how you are planning to grow. The team. Never underestimate your team. Tell me why you and your co-founders are the best possible team to get this done. Very important items to consider. Is every team member at the right place? Keep in mind that every team member might have different strengths and comfort zones. It is essential to put to place the right team member at the right place. Only then your team will harmonize, play together, and be constructive and be successful. Be very clear of what drives your team. And what would you do if you would have to replace one or more of your team members to keep your project going? Sometimes team members are hired by the competitors. How quickly can you replace team members in order to go on and continue to be successful? This is my last item for now, my call to action. Why did I just watch your pitch, if you did pitch? Tell me exactly what you need and be very specific. What kind of support do you need exactly? Perhaps it is technical expertise. Perhaps you need some consulting on the strategy, or perhaps you need funding for your project. And with these action items, I would like to introduce you to some successful examples, very selected examples that we have implemented at DMT. And for that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Richard Berse, who will take you through some of these examples. Thank you very much for now.
Yes, thank you, Michael. So right now I'm going to start to show you some of the successful innovation projects where DMT has been involved or is involved at different stages of the project life cycles. And there will be always one or more topics, leading topics from Michael's recipe he just presented, which those projects are good examples for. So I'd like to start with the Africa Maval project. It's a brand new project, Horizon Europe, with building innovation or building EU-African partnership on sustainable raw material value chains. And this one is at the very beginning. And not a classic innovation project, but rather a coordination and support action, which is what really supports the point that Michael said of tell me who your client is. Because one idea of the Africa Mobile project is to assess responsible investment opportunities and building an EU-African business network. So as a result, we try to foster EU and African partnership to ensure responsible sourcing of mineral resources for the European industry. So what does that mean? That means that, for example, our colleagues from DMT South Africa will go to companies and see who are potential clients for the EU. But also, on the other hand, it's not only that the EU should benefit from the project, but also the African partners, the local partners, of course. And that's why there shall be a local co-development with the best environmental and social governance conditions to create those long-term relationships. That's why we also have quite a lot of African stakeholders and partners within this project. For example, we have the African Women in Mining in here. We have the South African Council of Geosciences, DMT Kai Butler, our colleagues in South Africa, or Mari, for example. And also, moreover, it is a good example for a value proposition, because we will take a look at companies at 10 different country studies and give them a platform to show their unique selling points, which is an example of the so-called value proposition that Michael just mentioned. We have case studies in the 10 countries of Morocco, we have Senegal, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Namibia, Gabon, Zimbabwe, in South Africa, Madagascar, and Mozambique. So the second project I'd like to show you is the Illumination project. It's now in the second year, and it is an Horizon 2020 project, which so-called Bright Concepts for a Safer and Sustainable Digital Mine Future. So to say, mining 4.0. And the idea from our side, is to further develop an IoT platform for automated condition monitoring of mine machines, also visual dashboards and real-time condition monitoring, so that you can basically see from wherever you are, from your tablet, your phone, or your computer, how your mining machinery, the status is right now, or if there's a problem occurring, so that you can act before something happens and optimize, for example, maintenance cycles. Also, we had a predecessor project where we have already basic algorithms and user interfaces, which we will improve in this project, and also new use cases. So, for example, analysts while drilling, rock bolt status monitoring, tailings storage monitoring, or predictive maintenance of 3D printed machine replacement parts. And if you take, for example, the rock bolts, in comparison to regular rock bolts, those intelligent rock bolts have a sensor. So if you install them, you can see if there's stress on the rocks, and before something breaks, it gives you an early warning system, basically, so that you can act before you have an accident. And this would be an example because for traction, because you not only have many use cases, you also have many pilot sites. Michael mentioned the importance of having end users in your consortium, to have companies who have a problem which you are solving. So in this project, we have quite a lot of them. We have 5 pilot sites. For those are the fluoride mine, Uja and Mina de Orgiva in Spain. We have magnesit mine right now from IH Magnesita in Austria, tailing storage facilities from KGHM in Poland, underground mines from Boliden in Sweden, and also then a mining equipment manufacturer with Epirock drills. So those are the end users you need in the consortium to be successful in the commercialization after the project has finished. Next project I'd like to show you is the NEMO project. The long title would be Near Zero Waste Recycling of Low-Grade Sulfidic Mining Waste for Critical Metal, Mineral, Construction, Raw Material Production in the Circular Economy. That's quite a long title. So what's behind that? It's basically that we are trying in this consortium to reduce the original volume of extractive waste to only 5%. So with innovative process of bioleaching, for example, then extracting the metals which are in those tailings or extractive wastes, and also then the main bulk material, which is barren, shall be then used for construction raw materials, for example, or for cement production. It's a Horizon 2020 project. It will end this year, and we from DMT have done a code-compliant sampling methodology, and also we're doing a risk assessment and an economic assessment of the different pilot sites. We have here Boliden pilot sites, Terra Pharma and Finnish Minerals Group pilot sites. And this economic assessment would be the good example then for the business model. So we are basically proving that there is a business in doing what we are doing in this project, in extracting from waste valuable materials, and also for the market. So is there a market? And for those, let's say, cement products, are those products suitable for using in the cement industry? So this, again, a good example for market and business model. Next project I'd like to show you is Closure-matic. It's an EIT raw materials project and a management tool for continuous mine closure. So this is mainly a software, and it can be used as a systematic approach to do your mine closure plans. In comparison to your regular handmade mine closure plans, you have adaptive templates, for example. So whatever commodity, whatever region you are, you can use different templates customized to your situation you have. And this means, and also that you have the mine closure in front of you all the time, usually at mine companies, or sometimes at least they do it at the very beginning of the project, put it in the drawer, and then just at the very end of the project, they pull it out and see, okay, we have not done this or that, which have been our obligations. So it's not only interesting for mine companies, it's also interesting for state agencies, for example, who are responsible for overwatching the mining activities in their region, so that they can see that all the obligations have been followed up by the mining companies. And so this is then the example for the competition to the classic handmade closure plans. Okay, last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to the Ankolog and TRex projects. It is also EIT raw materials projects which ended at the end of last year, the TRex project, and basically a mobile drill core logging system that measures not only takes pictures, but then measures chemical information, mineralogical and textural rock properties. And in the Ankolog project, there has been XRF, laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy and hyperspectral imaging in the machine, and in TRex also Raman spectroscopy has been added. So here I'd like to use it as an example for the slide vision, because basically every company, every mining company, every geological survey who's dealing with large amounts of drill cores, they have the common problem that it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it is also expensive if you do all those things manually. And that was the clear problem which should be solved with this machinery. And that's why this project now is also the solution, which would be the other slide I'd like to reference this to, because the core scanner is now ready for operation, and first service campaigns are right now sold to first customers. So yeah, this would be then the Ankolog and TRex project. And just to remind you, all those projects I've mentioned, they are going sooner or later through all those mentioned stages from the recipe that Michael explained. And they are just good examples from where they are right now, or to different life cycles, as I've mentioned. So with this, I'd like to give it back to Michael to wrap this webinar up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this excellent overview of some selected projects. So what are the lessons learned from not only from the project examples that Richard just showed, but all of these some 100 projects later? very important lesson is that funding alone does not guarantee innovation. You can have all the money in the world, but you got to have the right infrastructure. You got to have the right processes in place. You got to have the right sequence in place, and you need to have a buyer for your product before you launch publicly funded R&D or innovation projects. Innovation without commercialization is essentially a product without a buyer. We cannot pursue this procedure any longer. We need to have a buyer beforehand. We cannot afford, as a company, we cannot afford to pursue this line of processes. You need a buyer for your product, whether this is a technology or a service. And that leads us to the third point. The driver for innovation is client demand, no doubt. Yes, you do need the right team. Yes, you do need the financial funding, and you do need the innovation structure. But the launch, the actual incipient, the actual driving force behind it is the client demand for companies such as DMT as a service provider. Of course, you also need the facilitators, which include expertise and a motivated and incentivized team. And with that, I would like to wrap up this webinar. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention for this webinar. And here I would like to hand it back to Dominic for some final words. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. That was very interesting, and I hope you enjoyed it too. All of you. Now we've got about 15 minutes left if you have any questions. So please put them into the chat room. And there's one question here. How would you measure successful innovation?
For me, successful innovation would be if you end up being able to commercialize your product, or whether this is a technology or a service. And this is really what I pointed out earlier. You got to have a buyer for your product. You got to do the commercialization. So it can be measured by simply monitoring the success, by simply monitoring the turnover, and of course also included with that is the profit that you make over, say, 3 to 5 years. Whether this is 3 or 5 years, it's really up to the individual company on how to measure. But you've got to have some controlling in place that measures the impact and therefore also the success of this innovation.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question. Sorry, I couldn't catch one point. Is Ankolog ready for sale or rental service?
Sorry, you're gonna have to repeat that. Is what exactly?
Yeah, I've got the question. Ankolog is already, the project has finished, and we are right now in contact with first customers. So if you're interested in rent the system, for example, you should get in contact with our product manager and Carlos Garcia Pina. I think if you want the contact details, we can give it to you, and he gives you the details on where we actually stand. But the project has finished, and we right now are in the middle of the commercialization.
Right. This next question. TRL 1 to 3 research is for universities? TRL 4 to 9 is needed for companies?
Now, sometimes companies also do basic research. That really depends on the company's structure. If you want to, for instance, but this really depends on how much of the IP do you want to secure. If you're very particular about the full details, the full technical specifications of your product, you will have to develop the product from scratch, from TRL 1 all the way to TRL 9 by yourself. This is the best way to preserve your intellectual property and the technical specifications of your product. Because if a company takes a product from a university or buys a product from a university and develops it for commercialization, it is likely that the technical specifications have leaked before, and that you will not be the only one who will commercialize or perhaps develop this project at a lower price, for instance, or with higher specifications. But there is a tendency that TRL 1 to 3 is generally concentrated at universities. Yes, universities are the ones that are doing the basic research and come up with the overall concept.
Thank you. There's another question. What if innovation is not for profit?
Yes, this is a different type of innovation. You can be innovative within a company by optimizing the processes, by making the profit, by making the innovation more sleek to the company, by making them more slim so that you have to go through less processes. But there's always a benefit. There's let's call it. You can replace the term profit with benefit. Somebody will always benefit from a true innovation. Innovation, by definition, includes commercialization. So there is probably a profit one way or the other. But a profit, it depends on how you want to define the actual profit. Maybe sometimes society can benefit from a certain innovation. But on the long range, you will always be measure, or you should always be measure to be able to measure the impact, and therefore also the benefit for the actual client, which can be beneficiaries, which can be the society.
Okay. Thank you. So another question: what is the typical time needed from ideation to product?
It depends. Go ahead, Richard. You can.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to say usually what you have as funded research projects, it's between 2 or let's say 3, usually 3 years up to 4 years. So this has been the time that the European Commission or the most research funding platforms are expecting to get from TRL 5 to TRL 7, for example, to really come to the point where you're on the cusp to commercialize a project. So if you want to go from there, then you'd say probably 5 years, because you also then need another year to commercialize the project. That's what I say as a short, quick answer, but it of course always depends on what you're trying to innovate or commercialize.
Let me add some detail. Thanks, Richard. From ideation to the actual innovation, that including the commercialization of the new product, can be on a very short scale. But it can also be, if you ask Elon Musk, he has worked for a long time on his product, but now that he's being successful, he's implementing very, very quickly. But you can ask other things. Remember the sailing picture that I showed you earlier? It took centuries to get there, to note that by adding these little plastic angles at the bottom of the hull of these ships, this took ages to find out about that. So sometimes it just takes some time, the right development and the right people to think about this. And it also needs a driving force. Sometimes it needs a little pressure to facilitate this. It's difficult to answer, but for Richard gave an excellent answer. The usual time for funded research is usually around about 3 years. But keep in mind that when you talk to companies, they're not happy with a 3-year time period for innovation. They want to see innovation implemented much faster, and this is why they sometimes utilize their own funding, why they reinvest their own profits into doing their own innovation. I guess it depends on whether this is critical, whether this is strategically important for the company. They will, if it's a large company and if they do have the necessary resources, they will not go through public funding. And certainly if they want to secure their IP or register a patent, they will use their own funding and try to implement much faster.
Right. Thank you very much. A couple of questions. I hope we can answer them all. We tried. Have you also a sales team during the innovation time?
Sorry, repeat the question, please. There was interruption.
Have you all also a sales team during the innovation time?
This is the ideal case, that a sales team is accompanying the innovation all along the way, because the sales team is involved right at the beginning. When you talk to the buyer, right? The sales team is basically looking over your shoulders when you talk to the buyer. During the technical talk, the sales team will pick up exactly the client's demand, and they will try to streamline the product range accordingly. So ideally, during the entire innovation project, and this is really what I've tried to explain, that it's the teamwork. The entire team has to be involved in the actual innovation. You need to adjust brochures. You need to adjust product details. The whole documentation needs to be adjusted. When you come up with an innovative specification with an additional technical detail of a product, this needs to be documented. Therefore, the sales team needs to be involved along the innovation all the way.
Right. Okay, the third question is coming back to the TRL. But do companies support research TRL 1 to 3? Yes, 1 to till 3.
This answer is rather short. If you go into public funding, companies are very unlikely to come on board into a project if you are developing a concept or you are trying to start from scratch. Companies are more interested to take an existing product that has been validated, that sits maybe at TRL 4 or 5 or 6, and take it to the market, because this is much more beneficial. But again, and I think we touched on this topic in an earlier question, sometimes companies do their own basic research, but usually they have an existing product which is not at TRL 1 or 2, which is at the higher TRL. Companies are less interested in TRL 1 to 3.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions. I would say let's take another question. I don't know how much time you, Richard and Michael, have, because I would suggest we can collect the questions and we can send it the answers to you if you like to.
I'm very happy to answer questions here online. That's if I think we have some minutes left, and we can.
Okay, let's try it. Okay, next question. Our view on innovation, I understood, is too much on technical development rather than on business model innovation. But how can BM innovations can be financed?
Okay, what I understood is that you're asking how that you have lots of technical development, but how innovation can be financed. I think that this was part of the webinar where we introduced some innovation funding opportunities, and we also gave an overview on where funding could come from. Right now, as far as I know, and I've talked to lots of companies along the way, it's never been better to find financial support for your innovation. There is literally so much money out there. People don't know what to do with their money. And I'm talking about companies, I'm talking about banks. They will fund a lot. Time for innovation funding, for acquisition of funding for your startup, for your new product development has never been better. Never been better in Europe, never been better in Germany.
Right. Next question. What drives successful innovation? Analyze market, make a prototype before a customer asks, be the first on the market, or wait for market demand to have safe commercialization. Sorry.
The clear answer is talk to your client and see what the client's needs are. The client always has a need. And I'm talking from a DMT perspective as a service provider, where it's really essential to talk to a client first. The client is probably selling a product. This can be a technology or a service one way or the other. Or say he wants to develop a new mine. And there are always so many challenges. Ask what the client needs the most and try to think strategically. What does he need on the long range? Try to offer services not only on the short term so that he can reach the next step. Try to develop a strategy and try to develop a whole product portfolio that you can offer to the client. Not just one service, but please do address this, the ultimate, the pressing service first, but then take him by the hand and lead him through your service offers along the way.
Right. Quite a long question. It's more like a kind of statement. Thank you. Very insightful. Innovation also has a geographical, legal, social setting. What may work for one client may not work for another because of factors outside the control of the client and the innovator consultant. That's a kind of a statement, not really a question, but yeah, work kind of interesting.
Very interesting statement, and certainly very, very true, because sometimes you have to go through a regulatory side. For instance, when you want to certify sustainability of raw materials, you have to go through the regulatory side. This is something that is actually happening right now. Germany has just released last year the supply chain law, just to stick with that example for a second. And the EU, the European Commission, has released the criteria for sustainable raw materials. So this is the regulatory side. So now we have to make sure that our products, such as the certification standard for raw materials, is actually compatible with the regulatory side. And for that, one has to do benchmarking. So sometimes innovation needs to be, sometimes benchmarking has to be included in order to in place and market and commercialize this new product, especially when you have to walk through regulatory side, when it's not just a technological demand, when it is a demand that is being required by law. Yes. Good point.
Right. Okay. So there are two more questions left. This is a quite long. I can repeat it to you, Michael, if you like to. Doesn't it seem there might be an inconvenience cycle target? Need to find client demand. This is very important. First, to find what is the demand, you need to show product service. Second, to show product, you need the money found. Third, to have the found, you need to show the demand. How to demonstrate there is a demand for something you do not have the funds to create in the first place. Eventually, I misunderstood how all these steps works. Do you get it, or want me to repeat it?
I hope I understood the question. Let's stick with an example, an analog example. Maybe this helps. Let's try to think about the mining cycle. When you go into a mine site, let's say you have an investor who wants to develop a mine. You need to understand the processes involved in the development of the mine. Yes, this is a pre-requirement. You need to be an expert. You need to understand where this is going to, where this should end up with. Obviously, in producing raw materials for a mine. Let me just stay with this example, because I'm trained as a geologist, so this is where I know most about this. So you need to understand the sequence of events, so in order to be able to actually offer the right services. But I think once you understand the actual value chain, I think you will be able to offer the right services as an expert service provider such as DMT. I hope I answered the question.
Right. Okay. So it comes to the last question. Is it worth to protect IP at the initial stage when results are not yet clear?
You will not be able to secure your IP once you have unclear results, because you have to document when you register a patent or when you try to protect your IP, you have to make a product description, you have to make a technical description, and you have to document this description. So if your results are unclear, they can be unclear within a predefined error range, which is very typical of any technology. This is not a problem, but there cannot be a huge uncertainty. So you need to be clear on the overall aim of what your product is trying to achieve, and within a certain predetermined range, you can be a little fuzzy, but it needs to be clear enough so that you can register a patent. There are patent lawyers out there who will help you define the actual product description. They will certainly ask you for questions, and they will be very specific and they will be very detailed. And but the patent lawyer question will be along this line of detail.
Maybe just let me quickly add what's even more important at the beginning of a project, that you have a plan how to protect your IP, that you make some brainstorming of what will be achieved in the project, and do I need some steps to protect those IP in the later stages of the project. So this should be in place at the beginning of the project, so that you not at the end of a project realize that you've failed at one point to then do all the steps to protect the IP.
Right. Well, that's it actually. This was the last question. I would like to thank you all for joining us at the webinar, and hope you have had a great time and good information about this. Or we did, some last words from you, Michael or Richard?
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Right. So thank you. Stay well, and see you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.